Chapter 13. Little Debbie Reveals All. I was the firstborn child of parents who adored me and viewed me as a being of light and a testament to their young love. I was born July 2nd, 1959, in Fort Worth, Texas, while my parents were both attending Texas Christian University with the goal of becoming productive people in the world of civic duty and pride. Mom was destined to be a school teacher, and Dad was on his way to becoming a Christian minister in the Disciples of Christ Church. But events happened along the way that derailed my folks' ideals and visions for the life they'd envisioned, and I, as children do, absorbed and claimed a few of those bruises for myself. In 1961, my family survived a head-on car collision on a dark, rainy night that killed a pregnant woman in the other car. And both my parents plummeted face first through the windshield, tearing up my mother's face and temporarily wiping out my father's memory. I was asleep on the back seat and escaped completely unhurt. When I woke up, I was in the hospital with my grandmother hovering over my bed, and I smiled and said, "Hi, Mimi, I love you." I did not recognize my mother's bandaged face and screamed when she came home. I think that scarred her the deepest, for our relationship was never close until many years later when she was elderly and needed me the most. I remember a summer afternoon in 1963 when it was too hot to cook, so the three of us had gone out for pizza. We came back home to find our yard cordoned off with yellow emergency tape. The bomb that a man had planted in his ex-wife's car had detonated in the intersection in front of our house, spewing car and body parts into our trees and throughout the front yard. Police were everywhere, and for several days we weren't allowed into our house as the preliminary investigation took place, and then only through the back door. I remember peeking out through the front drapes while strangers combed our yard for evidence, and I kept finding tiny scraps of metal in the grass for months afterwards. Later that year, in November, my father treated himself to a birthday gift, a trip to see President Kennedy while the president was in Fort Worth on his way to Dallas. The thrill of seeing Kennedy was juxtaposed with the devastation he felt after coming home to watch on our small black and white television his idol's death by the hand of an assassin. Somewhere in there, Dad became disenchanted by the idea of becoming a man of God. He simply quit school within 1 credit of earning his degree in theology, and he left. He just left. He took off and followed the migrant workers of Texas and Oklahoma for a few months, working and living as they did. He worked hard, and he thought much. By spring of 1964, when he returned a reworked man, he packed up his little family and his 2 dogs and left Fort Worth for El Paso, where the broad horizons of a new life awaited. I became aware of the craziness of the adults and the world around me about the time Dad played the role of the lunatic king in the Festival Theater production of Henry IV. I think he was in a place at that time where the king's condition really resonated with him, so he owned that role, and he won Best Actor award for 1966. It was about that time that Hal Warren made Dad a proposition about a certain movie. That little window, that tiny sliver of time, was the best time of my young life, just before the mark of the dark times fully implanted themselves on my spongy mind. I turned 7 during the filming of Manos, and my sister was conceived right about the time of the premiere. I became a big sister the summer of 1968, a little more than a month after I turned 8. And I had been an only kid for some time when Julie came along, and I was already fairly independent by then. She was a chubby, cute baby, but pretty fussy, so I often wandered off to explore the mountain behind our home, to a friend's house down the street, or I just sat in the backyard under the only decent tree in the neighborhood, to get away from babysitting duties. Things had been feeling pretty unsettled at home for a long while, and I wanted to get away anyway. There was no fighting, no ill words between my parents, just a heaviness in the air, a deep, quiet foreboding that I instinctively avoided. I escaped through the theater. All of the character reinvention I'd done as the neighborhood outcast had prepared me perfectly for the world of stage. In 1970, I took acting classes at the Festival Theater on Monday and Wednesday afternoons with my first acting instructor, Richard Steele Reed, the paid resident director at the time. He was British, had studied at the Royal Academy in London, and set high standards for his students. But mostly he was snobbish and not a big fan of kids. I enjoyed the exercises and activities we did in class. Tongue twisters like rubber baby buggy bumpers to limber up our tongues and faces. Improvisation to learn how to think on our feet, and trust-building activities like falling into your classmate's arm without fear of hitting the ground. But I definitely did not care for my teacher's sternness and superior attitude. One day, Mr. Steele sent me out of class to wait in the lobby of the theater because I wasn't following his instructions properly. And having always been a somewhat fidgety kid, I meandered outside, and after a short time became bored there too, so I decided to walk the 1.5 miles home. No problem that I never walked it before because I'd been driven often enough to know the way. When he came looking for me and I wasn't there, he searched and began to panic when I wasn't anywhere to be found in or around the theater. By the time he was forced to call Dad saying I disappeared, Mr. Steele was distraught. After a quick call home, I was found in front of the TV, placidly eating a snack, and my acting teacher was a little changed from then on. The experience must have humbled him a touch because after that, he toned down his hi-hat act with the kids, and we all had more fun for the duration of his workshops. In November, Dad was cast as Gordon Lowther, one of the male leads playing opposite the Hollywood actress Julie Adams in a Festival Theater production of The Pride of Miss Jean Brodie. Mr. Steele, through his professional connections, had managed to entice the beautiful and talented actress to El Paso to do the play. I was cast as one of the 11-year-old schoolgirls, and this was a dream come true for me. Not to meet a famous actress, but to again be part of something that Dad was doing. I will never forget being singled out in such a sweet way on opening night when Dad sent a small bouquet of flowers to the dressing room for me. I can still see and smell them in this moment. Small pink carnations arranged in a soda fountain glass with a straw and plastic cherry to look like an ice cream soda. I remember sitting in front of the makeup mirror with the other girls while marveling at the treasure in front of me. 3 dozen roses would not have made me happier. Jan Wolfe took over the kid and teen classes when I was 12, and I began Saturday workshops with her in the summer of 1971. She inspired me in the confident way she carried herself and her critical yet nurturing teaching style. Jan then started a children's theater group where she would take us to schools to perform short plays. Our theater workshops became rehearsals and planning sessions. We did the directing, stage managing, acting, lights, costumes, and sets ourselves. Jan was our leader and procurer of many necessary items, but we did the work. It was an amazing time for my self-confidence, and I loved getting a special pass to get out of school to do it. It also gave me a slight bit more respect within my school and neighborhood, enough that I could breathe easier with that little touch of status. The kids I met in the workshops liked me, were interesting, and wanted to talk about things that I found interesting. Books, music, theater, how the world worked. They paid attention when it was my turn to perform, and it was heady knowing that there were others not so different from me and that there might be a place for me in this world after all. I became especially close to two of those kids, Dina Capone and Autumn Holder. They were lifesavers then and were still friends today. It seems funny to me when I look back that I don't remember much about the acting part of acting class, but I do remember the interacting, the soul-searching my friends and I had with one another. Autumn's parents were also involved with the theater and knew my dad, so she and I would visit outside of the theater at either of our homes. My discussions with Autumn often touched on the metaphysical, as we were both interested in how the universe worked. She still remembers sitting with me in my backyard while I seriously demonstrated my ability to talk to the plants. Dino's mind was more scientific, but he was also sensitive and compassionate, perhaps influenced by being raised by a loving single mother at a time when single mothers were not so public. He loved being on stage, but he also loved the technical aspects and usually had his hand in lights, sound, and stage managing. Dino was my sounding board for all the sadness in my life at home and was patient with my rants and tears. He was cute in a nerdy way, with braces on his teeth like mine. We kissed for the first time at a production after-party in the basement bonus room of the host house while slow dancing under the disco ball to Color My World by Chicago. I was terrified that our braces would lock together like the horror stories I'd heard, but we were fine, and it was magic. Jan's Saturday workshops, the children's theater, and my friends there became a powerful refuge from my home life, which was growing increasingly dark. By the time I was taking acting classes with Jan, my parents' problems had spilled over into every corner of my existence, overshadowed by Dad's major bouts of depression. To counteract his pain, Dad immersed himself in his work in the theater, and he began to stay away from home as much as he possibly could, working day and night and hardly eating, which led to several hospitalizations for malnutrition and exhaustion. His struggle left my mother hurt, angry, and alone. With the same social isolation I felt, she turned to me, making me her confidant. Among the horrific things she shared with me were the ways in which Dad was trying to kill himself. "Well, he's tried it again," she'd say in disgust, revealing how Dad had tried to put his head in the oven with the gas on, or downed a bottle of sleeping pills, or stopped letting food pass his lips. I felt abandoned once again. It seemed that Dad was always trying to leave me. As a hormonal girl on the edge of puberty, I couldn't conceive a world without my father. So in case any of his attempts were successful, I began planning my own demise. I even had a backup plan for my backup plan in case I chickened out. I was on constant alert, worn out, and sick at heart. I was just a kid without real-world issues, and none of the grown-ups around noticed my withdrawal from life. After Manos, Dad spent more time at work and we saw less of him at home. Both my parents were so busy trying to avoid their personal lives by focusing outward that everything crumbled without much effort until they separated suddenly in 1971 and divorced in 1972. Dad moved out of our house while I was doing the 6th grade thing at school. Mom was at work, and my 4-year-old sister was home with the maid. Mom brashly announced the change when I walked in from school one day. "Well, he's left us." I couldn't forgive her for that bald statement for another 35 years or so. Black time passed in this manner. Mom married a wonderful man, Big Al, an El Paso allergist that I couldn't accept for any good reason except that I was angry and depressed. By some twist of ironic fate, my stepfather enrolled me into the finishing school at Mannequin Manor as a 13th birthday gift, not realizing I had any former connection with the school. I thought this gift to be some horrific cosmic joke, since I was now a hippie with dreams of rock concerts and meditative contemplation. Al had dreams of a proper young lady who knew how to curtsy and greet the queen and make her mother, his wife, happy. For months, he dropped me off in front of the school in downtown El Paso every Saturday morning. Once the car was out of sight, I would wander around downtown or across the bridge to Juarez until the appointed pickup time, and then stand in front with the other girls waiting to be picked up. How was your day? Fine. What did you learn? Not much. Worked for me. More time passed. In 1974, Dad took a job in Southern California as director of the Ontario Boys Club. I followed a few months later, leaving my 5-year-old sister behind to continue my vigil of keeping an eye on him and making sure that he was all right. From then on, Julie and I were raised in completely different environments. Julie with a loving, active, and academic family, and me with my troubled, brooding father. It couldn't have been any other way for me. Dad's next role instantly became one of a single parent to a teenage girl. While still battling deep depression and constant suicidal thoughts, he met and married his second wife, Kay, who also struggled with depression. They were two damaged people who had found love. I passed the reins and let go of the responsibility of constantly worrying about Dad, knowing he now had a reason to go on. By the time I was 16, our lives were going separate ways, and by the time of my high school junior year, I was living with my boyfriend so that Kay and Dad could move in together and have Dad's apartment to themselves. They left for Northern California in 1978 and started a new family with a new child, my half-sister Ivy. I followed in 1979 and finally got to live my picnic dream numerous times. In my mind, I still clearly see the first time driving over the Golden Gate Bridge and on into Sonoma County, California, where I would live for the next 19 years. There I saw what I'd fantasized about so long ago on those picnics at the White Sands Proving Grounds. Oak trees and spotted cows all over the beautiful green hills, interwoven with vineyards and threaded with ponds and rivers, just an hour's drive to the ocean. I wept for joy. I got into the hospitality side of the wine business when I turned 21 and lived blissfully pouring wine, having picnics, playing in the river and on the beach, and sitting in tree-covered parks listening to jazz and bluegrass until I could get some of it out of my system. What a life. Dad and his family moved again, this time to far northern Cascade Mountains of Washington and the tiny town of Winthrop. But the difficulties of living so remotely in such an extreme climate forced them to move once again, and this time south to Oregon. By 2000, all of us, Dad's family, my husband and kids, my sister Julie and her family, converged in a small old logging town in western Oregon, thinking it would be great to be all together. We were so wrong. My stepmother decided to banish me, my sister Julie, and our children by default from her family. She based her decision on reasons that neither side could possibly agree about and that no longer have any meaning. We have lived separated by oceans, mountains, and valleys of painful history and contrasting realities while physically within walking distance of each other. Half a mile? It might as well be 10,000 miles. In 2000, because of the Manos sequel, The Search for Valley Lodge, this isn't in the book, but that, let's see, that sequel never happened. Manos Returns happened and is now on Amazon Prime. That's not in the book, but that's the truth. Because of the Manos sequel, Dad and I found a common thread that my stepmother deemed an acceptable form of communication between us. We were allowed to see one another if it was Manos related, so I continued to find all opportunities to take advantage of this opening. I never contacted Dad directly, not wanting to rock the boat in any way that could sever that fragile connection. My friend Rick became the conduit by which we could see one another. Rick would call Dad's house and set up the meeting that would always take place at the neutral territory of Rick's house. The rest of our relationship was entirely random. I'd spot him at Safeway or Walmart or flag him over in my car for a visit by the side of the road. It was always bittersweet. The greatest tragedy of all that dissension is my children's loss of a remarkable and loving grandpa while they were growing up. And for him to have missed the growing up of my remarkable and loving children. The past can't be erased, but we can always move forward. Dad is 80 now and things have mellowed some. I now call him directly and share the latest Manos news. My children have been able to see him on rare occasions too, and he has even met his new first great-grandson. I can say with passion that Manos is responsible for the healing between us and can think of no other force on this earth that could have arranged for this to happen so long after I'd given up any hope. In fact, it's much like the resurgence of a B movie that most people thought had died in 1966. What can I say? It's the will of Manos. That's the book. It's all on YouTube. Last part though, the epilogue by Tom Naiman, and I hope you can see this picture. That's one of our random meetings in the meat department at Safeway. Epilogue by Tom Naiman. In large part, I am absolutely stunned, shocked that Manos the Hands of Fate is carried forward all these years because I was there when it started. The production, naming, wording, acting, I knew exactly what it was when we made it, and what in the name of heaven has brought it forward 50 years later, I can't imagine. I don't know if it's a testament to where our country is now, or whether it's the people involved in all the Manos-related projects. I couldn't tell you. It's very interesting to see it not only alive, but continuing to grow. I don't get it, but I will say it makes me happy. So go for it. I'm done. Thank you so much for being here with me through this this thing, and keep checking back with my YouTube channel. Subscribe. I'm doing a lot more things. I'm teaching some art classes and some crafts and telling more Manos stories. There's a lot to tell. There's so much that's happened even just since I've written this book. So I will see you soon. thank you so much for being part of this story with me.